Okay, good morning or good afternoon, everyone. We still have a couple of people joining. Just a minute. Okay, I think everybody who wants to join is joining. So good afternoon. My name is Alan Lilly. I'm the presiding hearing officer of the State Water Resources Control Board's Administrative Hearings Office. And this status conference this afternoon is in the pending matter before my office involving the City of Solvang's petition to change water right permit 15878, which was issued on application A022423. And I'm just waiting for a moment to make sure. It looks like our YouTube is now going. Okay, good. So I see most of your names here. There's one phone in that there's just a number, and I'll ask that person to identify himself or herself, and then my staff can put a name there. So 805-705-6869. Who are you?
Good afternoon. This is Gary Kvistad, ID1.
Oh, Mr. Kvistad. Okay. So, Mr. Anderson, if you can change that to, we also have a tile for you, Mr. Kvistad. Are you calling in two different ways?
I'm watching on my computer. My audio on my computer is having problems.
Okay, and that's fine. So we'll substitute your name in for your phone number, just so we know who you are when you talk. So
thank you.
No problem at all. We're getting better at this technology. We've been doing it for a couple of years now. But we still have a few bugs to work out, so that's fine. So with me today from my office are Skylar Anderson, Kyle Woolridge, Nicole Mullen, and Amy Blunk, who will assist me. And as always, I'm very appreciative. I couldn't possibly run this hearing without their help. We have not ordered a court reporter for the status conference. We are recording the status conference by Zoom teleconference, and it's also being broadcast and recorded on YouTube Live. The Zoom recording will be part of the official record for this proceeding. We have held several prior status conferences in this proceeding, and you're all familiar with the process, so I'm not going to repeat that. I would like to have appearances, though, so I'll just go down the list of parties and ask you to enter your appearances. First, for the City of Solvang.
Good afternoon, Mr. Lilly. This is Tilden Kim of Richards, Watson, Gershon, appearing on behalf of City of Solvang. Also appearing at this hearing or status conference are city representatives, City Manager Zinnia Bradford, as well as Public Works Director and Water Manager Jose Acosta. And Mr. Acosta, is there another person appearing also for the city?
No, no one else is attending. We had someone else scheduled, but they're off today.
And then lastly, Mr. Lilly, my colleague, Chelsea O'Sullivan, who is lead counsel on this matter, as you may recall, she is on parenting leave. I'm happy to report that both mother and daughter are doing great and healthy. Ms. O'Sullivan is scheduled to be back from parenting leave September 12th. So thank you for accommodating her extended leave, but she is expected to be back middle of next month.
All right, well, thank you very much. That's the second baby for this proceeding. So I believe Ms. Hall gets the credit for mother number one during this proceeding, and Ms. O'Sullivan is mother number two. So congratulations to both of you. I'm glad things are going well, and hopefully we can get this proceeding going on. I'm certainly fine. I always like hearing about more children coming into the world, but hopefully we can get this proceeding moving forward with hopefully some more success than we have in the past. But anyway, thank you for your report.
Yeah,
and good afternoon to you and Mr. Acosta and Ms. Bradford.
And then, Mr. Lee, if I can just, before I forget, I personally did not get notice of this status conference until just several days ago, and I was lucky that I was forwarded the notice of the status conference from Mr. Acosta, and I checked my inbox, and both I and Ms. O'Sullivan had checked our inboxes, and we did not get receipt of that notice, even though the email list did list us as recipients. And we checked with our IT department, and our IT department checked all the incoming emails, and inexplicably our firm did not get that notice. So our IT folks are telling us there's something on the State Water Board's side in the failure to be able to complete the transmission of the emails to our firm. So I've told my clients if they get any notice to forward them to us. But I just wanted to let you, Mr. Lilly, know that for inexplicably there are some technical issues that have prevented us from the legal representatives from getting some past email correspondences from the State Board in this matter.
All right, well, that's certainly serious. And I think we've had problems with email communications with your firm in the past too. So, and of course, certainly I don't understand the details of IT, but Mr. Anderson, I will ask you to work with Ms. Blunk and the State Water Board's IT department to see if we can figure out what's going on, because obviously we want you to receive all our emails. So we will note that and try to do some test emails back and forth to see. I am pretty sure that this has to do with some security concern that's basically become over secure. That's our IT department constantly is worried about hacks and things from the outside. Of course, it's no excuse, but I suspect that's what's going on, that somehow there's been a blockage of communications with your firm, but obviously we need to correct that.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Lilly. And to make something complex and puzzling even more puzzling, as you may know, I'm also counsel on another proceeding in which you are the administrative hearing officer, the City of Marina CEMEX matter, and I've been getting emails from the State Water Board in that proceeding. So it's a mystery why we're not getting emails in this proceeding. So just want to let you know that.
Okay, that is a mystery. So Mr. Anderson, I'm sure he's on, and I'll ask him to take the lead on seeing what we can do to resolve that. I don't know the answer, but I know who we can contact to start with, and they certainly are far more qualified than we are to deal with that. So we will work on that. Thank you. Okay, so going down the list, who's appearing today for Alisal Guest Ranch?
Good afternoon, Mr. Lilly. This is Stephanie Hastings on behalf of the Alisal.
Okay, good afternoon, Ms. Hastings. And then who's here for Improvement District number 1?
Gary Kvistad for ID1.
All right, good afternoon, Mr. Kvistad. And we certainly can hear you fine, so that's good.
Also for ID1.
Yes, good afternoon, Ms. Esposito. For NOAA Fisheries, who is appearing today?
Good afternoon, Mr. Lilly. Darren Brumbach with NOAA Fisheries.
Okay, and I take it Ms. Beal is not on this afternoon?
That is correct.
Okay, and that's certainly fine. This was on relatively short notice. And for Cal Trout,
Good afternoon, Mr. Lilly. Maggie Hall on behalf of California Trout at the Environmental Defense Center, and Russell Marlowe for Cal Trout is also listening in.
oh, Russell Marlowe, I do see you. Okay, good, thank you. And good afternoon to both of you. All right, for California Department of Fish and Wildlife,
Mr. Lilly, Lena Germanario appearing on behalf of California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and my colleague Nancy Murray is also on.
all right, good afternoon to both of you. Thank you. And for the Santa Ynez River Water Conservation District,
Good afternoon, Mr. Lilly. Steve Torgiani for St. Anne's River Water Conservation District. And we also have Kevin Walsh on, who is the general manager for the district.
okay, good. All right, and have I missed anyone? I think that's all the appearances. If I missed anyone else who's appearing today, I think I've got you all. Good. All right, so does anybody have any questions about our process before we get started with the status conference? You've all been involved with these before, so at least most of you have. So I'm going to go down my list of comments and questions, and we'll get through this as expeditiously as we can. First of all, at the outset, I want to apologize for my long delay in getting back to this proceeding. We had our last status conference on February 2nd, and I certainly had intended to get to this sooner, but I was involved in other proceedings, calls to the board, and so forth that took longer than anticipated. So I just was not able to get back to this until August, and it's totally on me. I know I've been pushing all of you to get your filings in, and you met all your deadlines, and then I didn't go forward with my schedule. So that's a shame on me, I guess. But anyway, that's on me, and I'll certainly try to keep moving forward. I do want to start, and if any of you know, please answer, and if you don't, we can certainly follow up. But my understanding is the so-called operative pleadings, to borrow a phrase from courts with real judges, is we have Solvang's water right change petition, which Solvang filed on May 7, 2015. And then there was an amendment to that to change the points of diversion on August 7 of 2020. And then there was a letter from Solvang's prior attorney on September 18 of 2020 discussing some changes in operations. So my understanding is that those documents together form the operative petition. I don't know, Mr. Kim, do you have anything more to shed any light or information on that?
Mr. Lilly, I don't have the file in front of me, but those deeds and documents sound about right in terms of the quote operative pleadings.
Okay, so what I'll do and that's fine. I certainly this isn't like school. We're not trying, or like law school. We're trying to hit you with unanticipated questions. But what I'll do in the status conference order is just ask you. I'll recite what I have and ask you to send a confirmation or a correction if I don't have that right. But I do want to make sure we're up to speed for going forward. And then as far as protests go, I have in my files 4 protests from the following parties: National Marine Fisheries, Cal Trout, Alisal Guest Ranch, and Improvement District Number 1. And they were all filed on April 25 of 2016. And incidentally, these files of these documents all should be in our folder that we've posted on the State Water Board's FTP site for this matter. You have to kind of click around for the appropriate subfolders, but they should all be there. But my understanding is those are our 4 pending protests. And I do understand there have been some settlement agreements with 2 of those, but are those in fact, have I missed any protests, or are those in fact the 4 protests we have? Hearing no objections, I will assume that's correct. And then on September 22nd of 2021, the attorneys for Alisal Guest Ranch and Improvement District Number 1 filed what they called conditional withdrawals in conjunction with a settlement agreement. my notes say filed on September 22nd. It was either 22nd or the 27th, but anyway, September of last year. Conditional withdrawals with the settlement agreement. So, and that so far the Cal Trout and National Marine Fisheries protests have not been resolved. So is that in fact the current status of protests right now?
That is my understanding, Mr. Lilly.
Okay, thank you. And again, I'll put this in the order, and if anybody thinks I've missed anything, please let me know. Okay, so with that, I did send out a notice earlier this month on August 10 with a notice of the new status conference, proposed mediation, and planned pre-hearing and hearing schedule, which describes my current thinking for this proceeding. And I listed 5 status conference issues that I'd like to talk about, mainly hear from you about today. Moving forward to page 2 of that notice, in the middle of the page, which says status conference issue number 1 is, what is the status of the settlement discussions between representatives of Solvang, National Marine Fisheries Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and California Trout regarding the issues raised by NMFS's and Cal Trout's protests to Solvang's water right change petition. So as I said, I certainly have not received any documents indicating that those protests have been resolved. So I'll ask, and maybe I'll just start with you, Mr. Kim, and then ask the other parties to respond. Without disclosing the substance of any settlement discussions, can you provide me with a report now on the status of any settlement discussions with those parties that have been occurring?
Will do, Mr. Lilly. So the city of Solvang did receive a fairly detailed settlement, proposal / demand, however which way you want to characterize it, from the remaining 2 protesters. The city, in connection with our consultants, reviewed and analyzed the settlement proposal, and to make a long story short, we didn't know where to go from there because the settlement deal points, for lack of a better word, appeared unworkable for the city on a going forward basis. But having said that, we did have 1 or more Zoom meetings after that settlement proposal to discuss any path forward, and that's pretty much where things have left off. And so, to make a long story short, I don't know whether the parties are so far apart that settlement is not feasible, or maybe there are some fundamental misunderstandings or fundamental gap, so to speak, in terms of the perceptions of the respective parties' needs and demands. And so, to that extent, I think that the proposed mediation would be helpful, because then it would allow for a more extensive discussion of the deal points and an exploration of any disparities among the parties' positions and understanding of those parties' positions. And to that end, then there'd be further ability to assess whether settlement is possible. So to that end, the city has reviewed your settlement conference notice and the outline of the proposed mediation protocol, with you being the mediator. I've already reached out to our consultant, who I think would be very helpful in those mediation discussions, and they are available with those timeframes that you have mentioned, as well as the city representatives are also available. So long story short, the city's always willing to talk and discuss to see if settlement is possible, with guarded optimism. The only other point I'd like to raise with you, Mr. Lilly, is I believe in your notice of status conference, you set a date of October 18th, 1:30 for the first mediation session. And I believe you then set another date for confidential exchange of mediation briefs. And I just wanted to explore whether you think it may be, and the other parties whether it would be more productive and helpful to have sent to you confidential mediation briefs for the first mediation, so that you're more well-informed of the parties' positions prior to the first mediation session.
Okay, and I actually had thought of that too when I was preparing for today's status conference. So thank you, Mr. Kim. You're actually jumping forward. It's okay, but you jumped forward to status conference issue 3 before I got there, but that's okay. We were going to get there, and I appreciate your update. So I will circle back to these issues, and we will talk about them more. I'm sort of plodding, so I'm going to go through issues 1 and 2, and then we'll circle back to 3, and we can come back to what you're talking about, and that's fine. So while we're on status conference issue 1, just one final question for right now, Mr. Kim. What was the date of your, and again, no substance, but what was the date of your last communications with any of the protesting parties? Or nearest month, if you can't remember the exact date.
Give me a minute while I search for that. And so while I'm trying to buy time as I'm searching for my files, I will note that that October 18th date, I don't know about the availability of Ms. O'Sullivan. I mean, obviously, she would obviously be necessary. So we would have to circle back and confirm her availability for.
Yeah, we'll come back to that. That's part of issue number 3. So and if you don't remember, I'll ask the other party. So,
and so I looks like the last meeting took place about I want to say about mid-May of this year.
okay,
But then there's some subsequent exchange of documents in July of this year.
okay. Okay. All right, well, that's helpful. Thank you. So who wants to go next? Does anybody want to, and again, I certainly, and I appreciate Mr. Kim not getting into the substance of offers and counter offers and so forth. But do any representatives of any of the protestants want to add anything to that discussion? Again, just on what's happened, sort of where you are and what the status is of settlement discussions. Okay, Ms. Germanario, your hand is up. Go ahead. Your electronic hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So I think what Mr. Kim said is we largely agree with it. I would just add that CDFW is actually currently awaiting the City of Solvang's response to a couple sort of follow-up technical questions. So yeah, the actual dialogue, prospect for actual settlement, it's unclear if those were there, but we are waiting on a response to some questions that we submitted in July. So just wanted to note that.
Okay. And does anybody else? I'll just call on you, Mr. Broomback. Oh, wait, Maggie Hall's electronic hand is up. Go ahead, Ms. Hall.
Yes, Mr. Lilly. I just wanted to clarify, to prepare for today, I jotted down just a couple of dates. So January 28th, 2022 was when there was the collective settlement proposal. And then on March 29th, 2022 was when we received the response that Mr. Kim indicated, sort of a, we're not sure where to go from there letter. And then after that point, there have been subsequent conversations, but our understanding is that those have been not within the confines of really settlement discussions. That what was in the January letter was a settlement package that involved all the terms. And there were some subsequent follow-up kind of technical questions, but our understanding has been that those haven't been in an effort to try to resolve the protests.
Wait, say that again. The technical questions are not in an effort to resolve protests, or are?
That's my understanding, is that the technical questions was one element were kind of born out of one element of the settlement proposal. But I don't think any of, at least us on the side of the settlement proponents, were thinking that that term alone would be sufficient to resolve the protests.
Okay, and that's probably enough detail for today. I'm just writing this down. Sir. Okay, and again, I don't really want to get into the details, but thank you. That's very helpful for understanding where we are. So, Mr. Broombach, is there anything you'd like to add for NOAA National Marine Fisheries?
Thank you, Mr. Lilly. No, I have nothing further to add at this time.
Okay, but I take it you and Ms. Beal have been involved in the discussions.
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. Well, that's helpful. Maybe not as good news as I would have liked to have heard, but that's okay. We have to start somewhere. And I'll say it, at least you're talking and you're not using derogatory terms when you describe each other, at least not to me. So that's good. I'm kidding, of course. I know none of you would do that. But we will see. It sounds like there may be something to work with, although certainly some challenges to going forward with mediation. And I'm going to circle back to talk about in more detail about what my ideas are for mediation. But I first want to just try to get a handle on the issues. So let me go forward to, or I'm going to go forward to status conference issue 2, which states, are there any other issues that need to be resolved for the board to be able to adopt an order on Solvang's petition? And again, just so we're clear, adopt an order doesn't necessarily mean granting the petition. It just means, is it far enough along that the board, we can hold a hearing and prepare a proposed order and the board can adopt it, whatever the order might be. So I received a signed settlement agreement among Solvang, Alisal Guest Ranch, and Improvement District Number 1, which appears to resolve the issues that were raised by those parties to protests. And my understanding from reading the agreement and the transmittal letters, which were entitled something like conditional withdrawals of protests, were that, number 1, implementation of the settlement agreement would not require any state water board actions. And number 2, subject to the conditions stated in the conditional withdrawals, the agreement would resolve those 2 protests. So I hope I've stated that correctly, but I'm going to ask for input. And this time I'll start with the representatives of the protestants. So Mr. Kvitsat or Ms. Hastings, does one of you want to comment on that, whether I've got it right or wrong or what?
This is Garrett Kvistad. No, I think you got it right. Our interest in the hearing right now is to monitor the proceedings to ensure that whatever outcome is consistent with the conditions in the settlement agreement. So our participation, at least for ID1, I won't speak for Ms. Hastings, will be to just monitor the proceedings to ensure that compliance. But other than that, as long as everything is settled or resolved or ordered in that manner, at least for ID1, the settlement agreement resolves all matters with Solvang without state board action.
Okay, and that's good. So, and Ms. Hastings, do you have anything to add?
No, Mr.
Correct.
Lilly, that accurately describes the LSL's position as well.
Okay, good. Okay, so as I understand it, and of course you want to monitor this proceeding to see where we end up. I don't think, of course, I don't know how this is going to play out, but I don't think whether there's a settlement agreement with the remaining protestants or whether there's a hearing and a proposed order, I don't see any obvious path that would lead to conflict with your signed settlement agreement, but you never know. You never know how things may play out. So I certainly understand why you'll want to continue to observe that. So Mr. Kim, do you have anything further to say in regard to the ALSAL and ID1 protests and the settlement agreement?
Mr. Lilly, nothing further to add on item number 2.
Okay, good. Well, that's good. And certainly that was encouraging to see that settlement of those 2 protests. That certainly was progress. Okay, so before I go on to number 3, I just want to make sure I'm not missing anything, but are there any pending issues besides the issues raised by the NIMS and Caltrout protests that would need to be resolved for the board to be able to proceed to adopt an order on Solvang's petition? That's maybe an understatement. I realize there are big issues with those protests, but that's good. I want to try to just, put it in bins or put boundaries on what we have to deal with. Okay, so let me go forward to status conference issue number 3. And I did spell this out in some detail, and just a little bit of background. I may have mentioned some of this last time. There are a couple of things going on in my office. Number one is I do have some training and experience in mediation. I went through a fairly intensive training course that was administered by the Court of Appeal for the 3rd Appellate District here in Sacramento on mediation, and that was mediation of appeals, which of course is a little different procedural setting than what we have here. But I have been involved in mediations of trial court matters and water board matters before, and negotiated various protest dismissal agreements back when I was representing clients that appeared before the water board. And I have a fairly good idea of how the Administrative Hearings Office works and might proceed in this matter if there's not a settlement, and how the board might do that. So I think I have some qualifications to be a mediator. Obviously, there are no guarantees, and you can decide how well you think I can do at this. But that was part of my thinking. I did get the sense from our last status conference that there at least wasn't an insurmountable gulf between the parties. So there's at least some possibility that mediation could be productive. Also, just the way future workloads play out in my office, it does. I talked to Ms. Kunze in my office, and it does seem to work fairly well for me to try to do this. And of course, you'll have to decide how much confidential information you want to divulge to me, but I am promising that won't go into our record, and I won't divulge any of that to Ms. Kunze or anybody else within my office. I'll just have you send documents to my direct email. It's still a water board email account, but nobody else can access that. And I'll file those documents on my the hard drive on my laptop, still a state water board laptop, but it's not accessible by anyone else. Now, one caveat I have to give is I don't think it's very likely, but if I get a Public Records Act request, I have to comply with it. And this, obviously, I work for a public agency, and there may be arguments that those documents are public records, although I think there are some exceptions for disclosure of settlement documents. But anyway, that's sort of where I'm coming from. But I think I think the timing is good, that we can do this mediation. You don't have to pay the mediator anything. You don't have to pay me anything can all be done within the scope of the State Water Board's budget, and we can go forward. And the evidence code does set out some pretty detailed statutes on how mediations can be conducted, and mainly on what can be then divulged in subsequent proceedings and what cannot. Ideally, we'll have a signed settlement agreement, and one paragraph of it will say this document may be divulged to the Water Board in subsequent proceedings, and that's all we need. We have a ways between here and there. So anyway, that's my plan. So I was going to say this later, but it's probably good if I say it now. My plan would be to prepare a status conference. My plan is to prepare a status conference order after today's status conference, which would confirm the planned mediation and sort of the operative pleading issues I just mentioned. And that will be a public document, which we'll send to all parties, post on our webpage, send to our Lyris email list, and so forth. And then I prepare a separate mediation notice, which I would just send to the parties, the representatives of the parties participating in the mediation. That would be Solvang, National Marine Fisheries, Cal Fish and Wildlife, and Cal Trout. And then we'd have our confidential mediation discussions from there, and we can set up Zoom or Teams meetings. And the good thing about that, if we don't have a YouTube link, which obviously we would not have, then we can all see who's on at any one time, and we can have side conversations back and forth. If necessary, we can see if we need any more technology, but I think that technology will work pretty well so we can have confidential discussions. And all the ex parte rules will go by the wayside as far as communications with me, but then I won't be involved in the hearing. So I guess I'll just say that's a little bit of a rambling statement, but having said that, does anybody have any comments or objections to this proposed mediation process for this proceeding?
And this is Tilden Kim for City of Solvang. Just nothing to add on what I've already responded to Mr. Lilly on number 3, and just want to reiterate that we do need to check all planned participants in the mediation as to their availability for that first scheduled mediation date of October 18th. And so,
Okay.
I'm pretty sure everyone can attend, but I just want to make sure, especially with Ms. O'Sullivan, that she is available.
Okay. And I wanted to do it that date because I then, as you know, Mr. Kim, from the City of Marina Court reference, I'm going into a hearing after that. And that's why I wanted to at least get it. It's no secret to anyone else. It's all on our webpage. But I do want to get that one meeting. I wanted to make it as late as possible so Ms. O'Sullivan would be back, but before I go into that other hearings. That's why I ended up with October 18th, just in case you were wondering. You probably figured that out on your own, but that's what my plan is with that. So my plan is then, I don't think I need, this is new territory for me, but I think this is within the scope of my authority for conducting this proceeding to order mediation. I don't think I need any signed consent agreement from everyone else, but I am taking the fact that nobody is objecting today as basically consent, or at least implied consent, to going forward with this proceeding. And I hope it will be successful. So that's what I plan to do. As I say, I've got to draft 2 different documents. One is the status conference order, which will sort of set out formally what's happening in mediation and sort of reiterate what I've just said. And then a separate thing kicking off the mediation. And I do agree with you, Mr. Kim. I would like parties to submit confidential mediation statements to me before October 18. I'll pick some date a week or so before. And just sort of let me know where everybody is. And one thing I'll say is, frankly, I mean, I know it's more work for you, but I think in some ways, even if you don't reach a settlement agreement, and of course, it's all up to you whether or not you do or don't, this will help all of you prepare for the hearing. I think it will help you refine the areas of agreement and disagreement so that the hearing can be more efficient, and frankly, so you can prepare more for that. So I hope you'll look at it from that way. It's sort of a hopefully settlement, but even if it's not, it still is constructive. And I will say, Mr. Kim, one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is prepare a draft, and you can send them first to me, although I'm hoping you'll agree these can be circulated to the other parties to the mediation. A document that has the current permit, city's current water right permit, which is the one I would think it was issued. I have the dates here somewhere, but when it was issued back in the 1990s, and then there was at least one order amending that. So I'd like to have the current permit be one file, and then I'll write this all out in the mediation notice, but then a separate file, which you probably will want to be confidential, that would basically say, okay, here are the changes Solvang wants the water board to make to that permit. Or said another way, if the water board issues an order directing Division of Water Rights to issue an amended permit with these changes, we'll be happy. That will take care of our concerns. Sort of like, what you want. And I know there are changes in points of diversion and so forth, but there also were some new limitations that the city has agreed to. So I'd like that to be laid out. And then for the other parties, basically, I don't have as clear of an idea of what to ask for, but I think you can tell me as much as you're willing to about what your concerns are with what Solvang has proposed and what your sort of what you need to resolve it. So that would sort of be your starting point. So I want to get sort of the two boundaries of our discussions. I think I need that. I don't know what the right metaphor is, but I need that before we can proceed. And ideally, if you can, if the three other, I'll call them three protesting parties, can prepare one document, that obviously makes it a lot easier for me. So we have a month and a half. It's a little bit of homework, but I would like you to do that going forward. And again, please, anything you want to be confidential, please put in capital letters in a header at the top of each page, something to the effect of confidential settlement document, do not disclose. And of course, I'll respect that. So anyway, that's sort of how I envision this going forward. Does anybody have any comments or questions about that? Okay, well, I'm sure once we get into it, we'll have, I'm sorry, Mr. Minario, your virtual hand just barely shows up against your virtual or your real background. You have your hand up, go ahead.
Sorry about that.
No,
Actually.
My mistake, go ahead.
Okay, great. So some of these might be resolved by the mediation order, but we did have a few quick questions. One is just whether the plan is to have the mediation in person or remote at this time. And then a second question is just about the general structure of the mediation sessions in terms of which party representative should be attending. Should we have experts there or whatnot, in addition to the attorneys, and sort of what each party would be expected to deliver in terms of, statements or whatnot. And then the third question was just on the statements in terms of, the content expectations and length and things like that. But maybe I'm jumping the gun. Maybe some of that will be resolved in the order. But
you're not jumping the gun at all. Those are all really good questions. So thank you for asking them. And let me say, at least at first, I think we can do this remotely, particularly because we have people ranging geographically from Los Angeles to Seattle. I mean, it's great for those of us in Sacramento, assuming the meetings will be in Sacramento. But does anybody have any objection to starting these remotely. And, and with mediation, we do have joint sessions and separate sessions, but I think we can do that pretty well with Zoom. Obviously, no YouTube link. And I will have to have at least one of my staffers help me with that. I can't possibly run these hearings, I can't run them at all without them. But does anybody have any feelings on remote versus in person? I'll just say my instinct is to start out at least with remote. But go ahead, Mr. Kim, your real hand was up. Go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Lilly. So I just assumed that at least the first mediation session would be done remotely for the reasons that you have stated. When the pandemic started, I was very resistant to remote mediations. Just because I just attended mediations in person for 30 plus years, but just to move cases forward, I did reluctantly participate in, I would say, at least 4 or 5 mediations remotely, since the pandemic started. And I've come to conclude that very little, if any, was lost in the mediation process through remote versus in person. I still prefer in person, but given the geographic challenges, that I think at least the first one should be done remotely.
Okay, well, and that's, I guess I agree with pretty much all that. I mean, I think we've all gotten much more familiar, obviously, with Zoom than we were 2.5 years ago, but it's still some benefits to being in person. So I don't know, Ms. Germanario, did you have any follow-up comments on that remote versus in-person question?
Well, I think, I agree. In my experience, proceedings, generally are still, productive even with the remote option. So, that would, I think, be helpful for the folks that are further away, but I'll leave it up to you to decide that.
Okay. All right. Well, I'll ask Ms. Hall and then Mr. Broomback. You're the other people who, assuming we did this in Sacramento, what are do you have any comments on remote versus in person?
Yeah, I agree with what has been said so far. I definitely prefer remote if possible. And it also affects, we do have one expert that we're planning to work with through this process. And that kind of goes to the next question about their involvement in mediation. But we do have one expert that could only participate remotely for health reasons. So that would certainly, it would be good to know if we're going to start remote, if at any point we're going to transition to in-person, we would rather know that up front because it helps us line up our expert needs.
Yeah, okay, and that's fine. Yeah, well, I'll just say, maybe I should ask you, Mr. Broomback, I cannot imagine you're going to say you want to travel from Seattle to Sacramento if you don't have to, but I will ask you, what's your position on remote versus in-person?
Your presumption is correct. I prefer remote. Thank you.
Yeah, and you probably then will tell me you're not sure you can get federal funds to authorize travel between 2 different states. But anyway, we'll cross that bridge down the road if we get there. That may be a bad metaphor, but we'll stick with it. So, yeah, I'm just going to say, I mean, I respect that, and frankly, I really like being able to do this, have impromptu meetings on 3 weeks' notice or even less, and it's obviously much harder to do that if I'm asking you all to travel. So we'll start with remote, but reserve. If we think we're really close and that would make a difference to settlement, I may come back on that, but that's the way we'll start. As far as who should attend, we have this in mediations and settlement, we do sometimes have this issue of client representatives versus attorneys, and then expert witnesses. And I mean, I know when I did the Court of Appeal mediation, that I don't want to cast aspersions on any particular industry, but let's just say sometimes it was really important to have authorized representatives who could sign settlement agreements as opposed to attorneys who could not. But I don't see that as a huge issue here. I mean, you're all professionals. You're going to do what you need. If we have an agreement, I have confidence you will do what you need to do to get your people with authority to sign that. So at least to start with, and you're the ones who all know about all the issues here. So I'll just say I encourage client representatives to participate, even if it's just listening in. And again, that's an advantage of doing things remotely. They can all just log onto their computers and listen and participate as necessary. But I'm not going to formally require that up front. I'm going to go off the assumption that none of you are going to play the game of, well, I'd like to settle, but I don't know if my client will agree. You may tell me I'm going to have to get back to my client and let's meet next week, and that's different. So let's plan to do it that way. And as far as experts, certainly I have no problem with experts listening in and being called on as necessary to answer specific technical questions. And I suspect for a technical case like that may be necessary. So we're gonna have to kind of play it a little bit by ear as we go. But does that, Ms. Germinaro, you asked the question, so I hope, well, that's the first two. Have I answered them at least sort of tentatively to start with? I've tried.
Yes, that's super helpful. Thank you.
Okay, well, we'll have to see how things play as we go. And then as far as the content for the mediation statements, again, I did mention a little bit, I do hope that Mr. Kim and company in his firm can prepare a version of the current operative permit with, all into one document with the amendments to date, and then proposed amendments to that. And I guess I'd say, to the extent you can, what I want to focus on is a document that ultimately, in my dream, everyone would say, yes, we will agree this can be the new amended water right permit, because that's ultimately what the board needs to adopt. So I guess I'd say, in answer to your question, Mr. Germinaro, I'll take a mediation statement in any form and any length. Don't get carried away, but I'm not going to put a page limit on it. But what's really helpful from my point of view is if I'm going to call it the three protesting parties, if they can prepare proposed permit terms and say, if we had these terms, or if the water board added these terms to the permit, then our protest could be dismissed. That's really what, at the end of the day, I need. And then I have boundaries to start working from. And hopefully we can, if you agree, trade those back and forth and talk about them, only if you agree. But anyway, so that's what I'd like to see as a mediation statement, but with whatever background and information you think I need to have, but then also with proposed permit terms. That's really what we care about. Ideally, at the end of the day, we would all work on a proposed order that the State Water Board's executive director could sign that says the parties have reached a settlement, the settlement agreement is approved. Attached here too is Exhibit A is the amended water right permit. I direct the director of the Division of Water Rights to issue this amended permit. And that's pretty much it. So that's my sort of aspirational goal here, just so you know where I'm coming from. Okay, I'm sorry if I rambled a little bit. Does anyone have any more follow-up questions or comments? These are good questions for Mr. Germinaro. Thank you. And Mr. Kim, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Lilly, just want to follow up on several issues. So with respect to attendees for the anticipated mediation, so, for private mediation with private parties, mediators often order that, party representatives with, full settlement authority attend. But of course, with the public entity, it's always a challenge because, the governing body decides, and that would be the city council here. So in mediations, the best that we can do is having someone with sufficient, how do I put it, position to report to the city council, and with enough credibility so that that person can tell you as a mediator that we would recommend a settlement to the city council, and with a fair degree of confidence that the city council would approve it. suffices for any mediation that I have participated in the past 30 plus years. So I imagine that is the same situation for maybe all of the remaining protesters. And I also am assuming that all participants in the mediation will have the necessary attendees to have those participants with those sort of qualifications and authorizations, as well as technical detail to make the mediation as productive and engaging as possible. So to that end, as I alluded to before, the city would attend the mediation with the city manager and the waterworks manager / public works director and one of our consultant experts to make mediation as productive and informative as possible. And we trust that the other parties will also do so. And then the other issue.
Let me just say on that. First of all, I understand you can't bring your city council to this mediation and that they have to make the ultimate decision. And it for at least for Cal Fish and Wildlife, which I guess if we want to get really technical, it's not clear they're going to have to sign this agreement because they didn't file a protest. Although if we go to a hearing, they're clearly going to be able to participate as a party. And I hope they can sign. But I mean, over the years, Ms. Marie and I negotiated at least 2 fairly detailed settlement agreements that come to mind. She may think maybe even 3. There are a couple, I keep thinking of more. But we always did it that way. I was representing public agencies who had to have public agencies approved, and she had to go to her director to get it approved. But, we had a lot of things we disagreed on, but ultimately we were successful in resolving those. And she certainly proceeded in good faith, and I hope she thinks I did as well. So anyway, it's not a council, but it's the same thing. The director, I assume, is going to have to approve this, or at least the regional manager, and he or she is not going to be available. And I'm sure for NOAA Fisheries NIMS, Mr. Broomback's going to tell us he doesn't have authority to sign a settlement agreement. It's got to go up somewhere up his chain of command. I don't know how high, but somewhere. And I suspect Ms. Hall is going to tell us that Cal Trout's board of directors is going to have to approve any settlement agreement. Are you going to say that, Ms. Hall? Does Cal Trout's board of directors have to approve any settlement agreement?
They would, but we could certainly work on, having a client representative there that would, likely indicate what Cal Trout, the higher ups would approve.
Yeah. Okay. So we're sort of, you all have slightly different chains of command, but it's sort of the same issue for everybody. And, frankly, at the end of the day, the biggest incentive to settlement is if you don't settle, you're going to go to a hearing. And that's one of the reasons I wanted to work with Ms. Kinsey to develop the planned hearing schedule. So, we do mean business and we will go to a hearing right away. It's going to drag on forever. So anyway, I've probably beaten this up a little bit more than I needed to, but does that answer most of your questions? And I've got some background noise, so I'm going to see if this will work.
Mr. Lilly, this is Tilden Kim. That answers the questions that I had. The only other comment on the mediation issue that I wanted to raise was whether you were contemplating the participating parties entering into a mediation agreement that parties typically sign prior to mediation. And if that is how you wish to proceed, then I assume that you would be circulating that mediation agreement along with the post-status conference order that you would be issuing.
That's a good question. I have not had this situation where we had a pending hearing where I could issue orders, but I suspect you and the other parties will be more comfortable if you have a signed mediation agreement. Is that what you're thinking?
I was just raising the issue of whether a mediation agreement was within contemplation by you as well, the other parties. the mediation agreements that I've agreed to before, ADR services or jams. I mean, it's very short. Basically that the parties agree to mediation and all communications therein are confidential and are inadmissible in any further proceedings and some other details. So if parties desire to have me draft a very short, simple mediation agreement that addresses those issues and feel more comfortable in proceeding with mediation with a signed document memorializing that, I'd be more than happy to prepare to do so.
Yeah, I think one of the main benefits is then if you bring in people who haven't been through these 7 status conferences we've already had, you can give them the agreement and say, hey, we really mean it. You've got to keep these discussions confidential. And I think that does have some value. So my instinct is that, yes, we should have a signed mediation agreement, but let me ask Mr. Minario, Mr. Brumback, or Ms. Hall if you have any comments on that.
We would be supportive of that. I think it would just help clarify, the process and the understanding of confidentiality and everything like that.
Yeah, well, that's my guess. Mr. Brumback, can NIMS, NOAA Fisheries sign a mediation agreement? Or I think it's in your interest.
I'm not sure, but I would agree that it seems wise. I'd have to check back both with my leadership as well as.
Okay, yeah, well, I understand. I'm putting you on the spot. Presumably Ms. Buell will be able to give some input on that. Ms. Hall, is that okay? I assume, well, I shouldn't assume. Does CalTrout agree a mediation agreement would be good?
In general, our clients have, but I don't know that I have worked with CalTrout on a mediation agreement before, so I'd have to double check, but generally that should be no problem.
Okay, so again, Mr. Kim, this is every good deed turns into a homework assignment. So can you please, and again, I mean, it basically, all it needs to say is these sections of the evidence code apply, the parties agree to keep these things confidential and so forth. I think it can be pretty short, but can you prepare a proposed agreement and circulate it to the representatives of the other 3 protesting parties?
More than that. Yeah, more than that, Mr. Lilly.
And if all of you are on board, then when you file your mediation statement, I'm pretty confident that if all 4 of you, all 4 parties agree that I will sign it. I think you should have a place for me to sign it too. I certainly want to be a party to that as far as disclosure goes. So, so why don't you circulate that as soon as you can, with the goal of getting something that you can send to me in early October that says all the parties have agreed to this mediation agreement. And then if so, we'll just talk about it on the 18th, but we'll plan to I'll just confirm that everybody's on board, and then we'll have everybody sign it electronically soon after that.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to, Mr. Lilly. And as I stated before, I'll just find some very short mediation agreement that I've entered into many times before with 1 or more of the ADR services, and just customize it for this matter and circulate.
Yeah. Okay. The one thing that sometimes seems to be forgotten in mediation agreements, although it's probably obvious anyway, is it should have some provision that basically says if the parties sign a settlement agreement that says it's not subject to the mediation confidentiality requirements, then it's not, and it can be public. So I do think it's good to think ahead to that. Obviously, if we have a final agreement, that would not be confidential.
Oh, absolutely. Well, as a public entity, in any agreement that a public entity signs, a settlement agreement, by definition, a publicly available document.
Yeah, it's just good to make sure the mediation agreement recognizes that, even though, as you say, it's pretty obvious. Okay, good. Well, thank you. I appreciate all your input on this. You're helping me through this. Obviously, this is the first time the Administrative Hearings Office has done a mediation, although I think most of us have some experience with them from other settings, but I have a few bugs to work out. Okay. So if there's nothing else on number 3, that would be status conference issue 3. Is there anything else on status conference issue 3 that mediation process. We've covered it well, had a very productive discussion. Does anyone have anything else they want to say? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to go forward to, oh, go ahead.
Briefly, just Darren, this is the time I think to mention if you have a conflict with the schedule, right? Because you're asking about the mediation, or
Yes.
am I wrong about that?
No, yes, this is the time. Please go ahead.
So Darren, you mentioned you have some problems with some of the dates. Did
Oh,
that clear up?
yeah, Mr. Broombeck, do you have schedule conflicts?
I do after the 18th. I have a number of conflicts. What I would do though is commit to investigating an alternate that would be brought in to satisfy the representative of NOAA Fisheries.
Do your conflicts then go on for a while into November?
Yes, they do.
Okay. Will Miss Beal be able to participate?
I need to confirm with her, but I did not hear to the contrary of her availability. So I'm assuming.
Okay, we certainly, certainly like at least one of the two of you, because you're both by far the most familiar with this of anybody at NIMS, as far as I know. When will you become available again?
Well, then it gets more thick, and I'll just cut to the chase there. I'm looking at retirement shortly after the first of the year, and so this, if it's unfortunate and settlement isn't reached, and it does go to hearing, chances are that would be another biologist representative from NIMS, and so I think it just speaks to the timing to get someone else involved, even if it's just working in partnership with me.
Okay, well, and that's certainly good news. It could have been a lot worse. So I'm glad to hear that you're retiring. It's something that people of your age and my age think about a lot. I suspect I'm a few years older than you, but anyway, that's okay. But good news for you. And yeah, and I'll just say, it's sort of a side benefit of mediation, but it will help your successor get up to speed on the issues, because you know, even without confidential discussions, just getting familiar with the river and the biology and hydrology and so forth helps that person prepare for hearing too. So this may actually be a benefit for your office as well. And
I agree with that.
of course, we hope you'll have a great retirement and on to better things. What can I say? Okay. So thank you, Ms. Maria and Mr. Broombeck. Anything else on mediation in general? Okay, well, Mr. Broombeck, please do pass on to Ms. Beal that we're counting on her to carry the baton for National Marine Fisheries in this mediation, which I'm sure she will be able to do very well. Okay, so with that, we'll go on to notes here. The other status conference issue, which I think we'll go through pretty quickly. I did list a pre-hearing and hearing schedule, which I have cleared with Ms. Pinsey. She would be the one, the hearing officer, who would issue the formal hearing notice, but I did want to at least flesh out the general schedule. She has quite a full hearing load right now, but she did seem to think that she could fit this in. So again, these aren't any specific dates. Does anybody have any comments on that? And I'll be upfront with it. I think parties have more of an incentive to settle if they know that a hearing's coming up if they don't settle. So that's why we've done this. So any comments on that planned schedule, of course, subject to potential conflicts on specific dates. Okay. And then number 5, status conference issue number 5. Is there any other issue that anybody thinks we should address today that I've missed? Ms. Terminario, you're from electronic hand to real hand. Go ahead. Go off mute so we can hear you.
Sorry, my
There you
bad.
go.
Thank you. So we actually have some comments that I think may have fit better under issue number 2, and I apologize. I think I lagged in raising my digital or real hand there. I just wanted to clarify, Mr. Lilly. So you framed it as issues to resolve would include those raised in the cow trout protest, and I think that's correct. But maybe we would say that as supplemented by the letters submitted in this matter by, CWW, NIMS, and cow trout. And some of the issues raised in those letters include requests for updated technical analysis, robust analysis of public trust resource impacts, and also impacts from Solvang's proposed wastewater recycling program. So just as a reminder, or to totally clarify, those are some of the things we would seek to have resolved before a decision in this matter. And then there were two other things. I'm sorry.
No, excuse me, but I wrote down additional studies, impacts of wastewater discharges, but I think I missed something. What else did you say?
Just now?
Yes.
Oh, sorry. Okay, the first one was updating the technical analysis to reflect current conditions and groundwater surface water interaction.
Okay, slowly, wait, pause here. Sorry, I want to write this down. This is important. All right, go ahead.
Okay, first, yeah, so updated technical analysis to reflect current conditions, including groundwater surface water interaction.
Okay.
The second one was robust analysis of public trust resource impacts.
Okay.
And then the third was analysis of impacts from the proposed wastewater recycling program, which CalTrout had some great comments on that in their CEQA comment letter.
Okay.
And just two more that we would add that may not be totally clear in our comment letters. We were hoping Solvang could look into potential conservation measures or alternative water sources that may help reduce their need for pumping or the amount of pumping.
Okay.
And then the last one was just a flag to the fact that the Southern California steelhead is now a candidate species under the California Endangered Species Act, and currently has all of the protections of a listed species under CISA during the candidacy period. So just as a reminder to Solvang, I think, those impacts should be assessed and consideration should be given to the possible need for permitting for any impacts or projects that might have an impact.
Okay.
And that's all. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And of course, I'm not going to ask you to, well, actually, Ms. Hall, your hand is up. Why don't you go ahead next before I say anything? Your electronic hand is up. Go ahead.
Yes, just since we're on the discussion of further analysis, I also just wanted to clarify that CalTrout's position is still that a subsequent EIR is required here. But of course, if we were to reach a settlement agreement through mediation that eliminated significant impacts, then obviously we wouldn't be pressing for that. But I just wanted to add to Lena's comment that we think an SEIR should be prepared rather than the addendum to the old EIR.
Okay, and on that, Solvang did file a CEQA notice of determination for their addendum, I believe, Mr. Kim. I'm pretty sure I saw that. Is that correct?
I'm sorry. There was a blip on my audio that cut out the last half.
Okay, sorry. My question was, did Solvang file a CEQA notice of determination after the city council approved the CEQA addendum?
Yes, and the CalTrout and the city are currently within the time limits of a tolling agreement regarding any challenges to the city's CEQA documentation. So
okay.
Yeah, so Ms. Hall is correct that if there is a settlement, that it would have to be comprehensive in terms of dealing with those CEQA issues as well. But currently there is a tolling agreement in place.
Okay. Well, I guess it's good to know. It's an additional point, but that is important. I guess I should have known that CalTrout wouldn't miss a statute of limitations. So, Ms. Hall, anything else on that?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Okay. Well, and then just circling back to Mr. Minario's comments, this is one of the luxuries of no longer being the hearing officer. I won't have to rule on how far the hearing issues can go beyond. And I haven't even looked at the protests to see whether these issues are nominally within the scope of the protests or not. But I'll just say that certainly would be something. If Solvang contested the protestants' right to raise issues that go beyond the protests, that would be something the hearing officer would have to decide. And I have no way of knowing. I'm sure she doesn't either. She hasn't looked at this yet, but we don't have it. I don't know how that would play out, but that would be something that would have to be resolved through the hearing office, off the hearing process, just so we're clear on that. But anyway, thank you, Mr. Terminario, for flagging those. I hope, Mr. Kim, you wrote those all down. It's always hard when there are more issues to work on, but on the other hand, for mediation, as you all know, it's better to get everything on the table to start with, and then we know what we have to deal with, so we don't have I know once somebody referred to it as the oh by the ways that come in later on when you think you have a deal, and then somebody says, oh by the way, I have these 3 other points. So I'd much rather have them all on the table to begin with. So thank you. Okay, so anything else going forward? Because you actually got, I think, Mr. Terminario, you got to issue number 5, which are there any other issues the parties want to address, and circle back. So I'm just going to open it up. Is there anything else we need to talk about today that for going forward? Okay, so hearing nothing else, as I say, I will try to hammer out a status conference order. And as I say, I think already I'm going to go down the 2 tracks of one public document and then one more, I'll say more private document that'll just go to the parties involved in the mediation and kick off that process. And then we'll see where we are on October 18 and going forward from there. I mean, clearly this is going to take several sessions to work through, but I'm hopeful that we can get somewhere. So we'll see. Okay, and just as a reminder, Mr. Anderson did hear my request early on, Mr. Kim, that he worked with our IT department to figure out what in the world is going on for why your firm is not getting emails from our office in this proceeding, but is in the other proceeding. And we will certainly work on that. We take that very seriously, clearly. And if anyone else has any updates to their service list, please just shoot us an email. The best thing is send us an email to our Administrative Hearings Office email, which Mr. Anderson monitors daily, and CC all the other parties so they know to add other parties. And Mr. Broombach, your real hand is up. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a real quick question, if you don't mind. I just so I can inform my leadership going forward, in the event that we do not reach settlement through mediation, which I think we all hope we will the hearing, if there is a hearing, do you anticipate that to be remote or in person?
Oh, that's a good question. I wasn't anticipating that one. I hadn't thought of that one. And I don't know the answer, but I'll tell you what I do know. What I do know is that when I first set up this office, wherever it was, November of 2019, I thought we were going to be doing all our hearings in person because I'd never heard of COVID back then. Since then, we've done every single hearing remotely, and it's worked well. And so far, we're planning to continue to do hearings remotely. We've never received any objection from anyone. I think a lot of people welcome the remote hearings. So I'll just say, without any commitment, particularly because I'm not even the hearing officer who will decide, that I anticipate we will continue to do hearings this way by Zoom, but that could be subject to change. And one reason it could be subject to change is if some party raises an issue for why they think an in-person hearing is necessary. So, and obviously they haven't done that yet. So I hope that's sort of wishy-washy, but I hope that gives you some answer to your question.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. All right. Anything else? Oh, and I did say about the service list. Please continue to let us know if you're having problems receiving stuff, and also updates. It's very easy for us to add people we do try to keep a Word file of our service list posted to our AHO FTP folder. So all of you can just download that and use that rather than using your old service list, which might be out of date. So that's everything else we post in PDF, but that's why we post a Word file. I think we even have a folder called service list where we post that. So please use that and we'll try to keep that up to date. Okay, anything else for today? Well, as always, thank you very much. You're all really constructive, which I really appreciate. We've got hard work to do, but we'll go ahead and get started. So with that, everybody have a good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.